update on the car this week. This is actually the second one I've done. I just ended up losing one, or rather I didn't lose it, I forgot to upload it, and other things have happened since then, so it was worth starting again from scratch. I've been doing more with the body, just my mock-up of the framing. This has been a really good exercise because it's kind of helped me realize where the shape wasn't quite right or some of the measurements weren't quite right. So I've been able to go back and modify things in my 3D model, and I'm just going through now and recutting out the different stations, the different frame pieces to see what they look like. I've done the front here, so that's more or less correct now, and I'm in the middle of redoing the back. So this is the old back section, and I kind of worked out that there's too much curve in this, I think, and this is one of the problems with taking your original blueprint off a drawing of a toy. So you might be able to see down there, that's the new seat back hoop. It's less balloony, sticks out a little bit less. So you can see another one of the hoops there on the little bench. I've basically been cutting out the pieces on the bandsaw, sanding the edges, and then just gluing them together. And that's enough to just sort of quickly knock everything together. These cross pieces aren't the correct outer shape to follow the body, they're just the right angles and lengths to get these vertical frames in the right place. And one of the things I do to figure out if I have got all of the stations correct is use my long bendy stick there to check that I've actually got a fair curve across the body of the car. This thing is some sort of plastic or fiberglass. It's actually from the bottom of a Roman blind, so it's quite heavy and it's quite bendy, and you can use that to check the curvature along the body of the car. So for example, at the moment, even though this isn't the correct back, you can see with the stick just sort of lying on it, it's not touching in the middle, which means there's something wrong with that curve there. If you have it correct, it'll touch in all three places. This wouldn't actually matter in this case because on the actual car, this top piece isn't here. The boot lid actually goes sort of in here somewhere. So my new one hopefully fixes that problem. But it also lets me check that I'm getting all the horizontal distances correct. And you can sort of see there how much cockpit space there will be. It looks very tight, and it is very tight. It also looks very high up, which is how it's supposed to look. So this is very much a car where you're sitting very low down and you're sitting in it, not on it. And that's actually quite apparent if you start looking at sort of period photos. So you can see his shoulders are below the edge of the car. Same with this chap. He's quite low down, looking. You're almost looking at the top of the steering wheel. It's actually a bit annoying to see past. And here's another one. And the thing you notice from these images as well is these bodies are all different. So the major differences between the doored bodies and the doorless bodies, which are different shapes, but even with the doored bodies, there are quite a few subtle differences in the shapes. I'm not sure which are early and which are late, or what the changes mean. It's probably kind of hard to see, but this one is different to this one. We've also chatting to people who have had a chance to look at real cars. There's quite a few differences in the chassis as well. So on mine, for example, there's no middle crossmember. I've looked at the pictures of 8075, which this is a chassis copy of, and that doesn't have one either. But there are other cars that have a middle crossmember in here. So there seem to be differences from the factory. Another one I've seen is an original car with extra diagonal bracing in here, which mine doesn't have, and I've seen others that don't have that. So there's quite a lot of differences between all of the cars, which as a special builder, it kind of makes it a bit easier for me because I get to pick and choose how I want it to be. I'm not building an out of the factory replica. I don't think anyone could actually tell you what a car was like out of the factory these days, because they've all been messed around and they're all different and they've all changed. So it's good. I can make use of that. It is definitely replicating a Brooklands though, just bits of Brooklands. It's probably the best way to put it. So that's going well. I've got one more hoop to make, which is the back one, and then I'll redo the back piece and see how that all looks. What else have we been doing? The radiator shells over here. That grey is effectively zinc rich primer. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. I don't know what I'll do with it later, but the important thing is to get it on the car, and then I can start building the rest of the body around it. That's got the mesh in place. I painted the inside of it black. It does have the radiator cap on it. I still need to get the copper pipe to make the surround off the stone guard, and I'm waiting for some 4BA nuts to... I'm basically bolting those brackets on. On the originals, they were riveted and soldered, but that's on an original wet shell, so the solder was to make them watertight. I want to be able to take these off in future, so I'm just going to bolt them on with BA hardware for now. And let's see, the headlamps. So I've been working on these quite a bit, and they're coming up okay. So the first thing I did was strip any paint off them, especially the inside. The inside was actually painted black, and I ended up using this coating remover paint stripper, which is, it's not like the old-fashioned stuff. It's meant to be water-based, better for the environment, all that kind of thing. It seemed to take an awful lot longer. I had to leave it a couple of nights and do a couple of applications, but it actually worked pretty well, and it did get the paint off. With the paint off, I have been working on getting the dents out of them, and I have actually managed to get the worst of the denting out. They're not perfect, and I think it's this one. You can see in here where this was all dented up before. There was a big dent in the end. I've managed to planish all of that out. But you can see on here where somebody's used either the pick end of a body hammer or the end of a ball peen hammer to try and knock all of this out from the inside, and that doesn't work. That's not the way to do it, and that's what's left all those marks inside there. I'm not sure how well it's going to come up, and you can actually see on the outside where some of the hammer marks and things are, and I've actually planished that smooth pretty well. It's, like I say, it's not perfect, but it's not all bumpy and ripply. You can still feel it, but you can see the damage that was done when they did that by hitting it like that. So the way I've been doing it is with a suitable dolly on the inside, and I found this one works really well. Just happens to be the right sort of shape, and you sort of maneuver it around. And I've actually been using a slapper on it and slapping on the outside, and I found that you don't have to hit it as hard as you do with steel, and with that I managed to get most of the worst of the dents out of it, and I also cleaned off all the verdigris and stuff on the outside of it. There's still a little bit there. I'm not sure if you can see it, sort of this green stuff. So I've been trying to clean as much of that off as I can. Now these will be painted. On the cars they were originally painted. I'm not quite sure why the outside is so tarnished and the inside came up so well. And you can also see how it's all soldered together. And the rings as well, I managed to smooth out the edges where someone had tried to prise them off. These don't prise off, they rotate. You undo the little screw at the top, and then you turn them half a turn, or rather half an inch to an inch anti-clockwise, and then they'll pop off. So you don't need to prise them at all. But those weren't too bad. I smoothed off the edge. One of them has this dent here on the very corner of the rim. It was a lot worse than that. I actually made up a little plate that I could fit in there to get the worst of the dent out, but I can't get anything up onto the inside edge there, so it's always going to have that little ding to it, which is fine. I'm not trying to build a concourse car or anything like that, so we'll call that character. I don't know what I'll do about the rims. You can see they're pretty worn. The plating's all gone. I quite like how they look at the moment, actually. I'll finish the car with these exactly how they are. Like I say, they're normally painted, but until I paint the rest of the car, there's no point doing that. They're usually body colour. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be yet, but probably that maroon colour. And I've sort of cleaned up the rest. This is the mechanism, or the housing for the mechanism for the solenoid. I haven't looked at the solenoid yet to see if that's actually going to work. This was the original glass that was broken, and you can sort of see the stippled pattern there. There's lots of little tiny dimples in it. Apparently the reproductions aren't the same. I think they're more frosted, so it'll be interesting to see how they compare. I did manage to get the other glass out without breaking it. So the way the glass is held in is this outer shell is brass, and you can see sort of folded into it there's this very thin piece of aluminium. So this bottom edge comes up and folds over, and that's sort of crimping the aluminium in place. And then this was folded down on top of the glass. There was rubber in here that had all gone completely hard and perished. So I ended up soaking these in the ultrasonic cleaner at quite a high temperature just to soften the rubber, and it all basically just fell out. And then what I was able to do was get a thin screwdriver under the edge of the glass and the aluminium and just start prising it up. And then using these very thin but smooth pliers, I was able to sort of grip the edge and slowly work my way around, lifting it up. And then I was able to get a flat piece of metal behind there with a slight curve on it and sort of planish this flat. So the glass sits in there, and then this is normally folded over. It is very soft. Will have hardened a bit because I've been hammering it, but what I'm actually thinking is when I reassemble everything, I need to try it with the spiders in place and the reflectors, but you can see the lip in there. It's well away from where everything mounts. So what I'm hoping is I can just mount the glass back in. It'll sort of fit in like that with modern sealant. The modern windscreen sealants will glue that in place no problem and seal it all up nicely, and then I don't have to even try refolding this over. If I can avoid doing that, I will, because there's a high likelihood of breaking things. And this aluminium is also fairly corroded in places. It's a bit hard to see, but there's quite a bit of corrosion in there, and in a few places it's actually corroded through or torn, so I don't want to risk bending it again. The reflectors cleaned up okay. They're not perfect. I clean those in a similar way to how you clean telescope mirrors, which is no abrasives. I used slightly warm, a few drops of washing up liquid water, and just carefully cleaned it with that without really rubbing it. And then rinsed it off with distilled water, and then dried it off with compressed air so you don't have to touch it. And then I just carefully wiped over it with the Salvet cloth which arrived. So the funny thing is, this is what they mention in the original period manuals for this stuff. So this is from the 1930s. They say the only thing to touch the reflectors with is give it a very gentle wipe with one of these cloths. And I just find it amazing that you can still get them. It's just basically a cotton cloth with a particular sort of weave to it that picks up, it takes away the fingerprints or any dirt or grime on the reflectors. So it actually came up pretty well. The other thing I want to look at doing is, move this glass. This is an example of one of the bulb holders, and these are just single filament bulbs, and these are actually adjustable. So they go into the back of the reflector, and there's a screw that you can adjust, and you can move this in and out to change the focus. What I want to do is get double filament bulb holders, and then I can hopefully fit modern LEDs. You can get LED headlamps now that should fit these vintage lights, and I believe you can now get them where they actually have the correct the same setup as the dual filament bulbs, which used to give you the high beam and the dipped effect. I believe there are now LED bulbs that'll do the same thing, so I need to look into that. But I'm really pleased with how these have come out. Like I say, they're not perfect, but I'm not building a perfect car. So I think these are going to work really well, and they look the part. So that was where I was up to on that. The other thing was, obviously, people have seen the garden updates. We do those fairly regularly. They were really just for my family, but other people seem to like them, so I've just been posting them up now. Somebody asked for a little tour of my workshop. I'll do that next, I think. So people will have seen bits of this in all the different films. I don't really call this a workshop. That sort of implies some sort of professional ability at this kind of stuff, which I obviously don't have. And I don't really call it a garage either, even though that's what it is. It's a big 10 meter by 10 meter garage shed thing. We call it Big Shed because we've got another single car garage on the other side of the house, and it just made sense to call one big shed and one little shed, and then we were able to call the big round green water tank there Humpty. But it also makes it easier for us when we're talking about stuff and the different bits of the garden. We talk about your little shed garden or behind big shed. So it actually works quite well. And we also use that as our email address, Big Shed, Little Shed, because it's a heck of a lot easier than my old email address and my YouTube channel name, which is ASCIImation, which has a whole history behind it going back to the mid-90s kind of thing. It's an email I've been using for years, so I'm not going to change that one, but it's terrible to tell people over the phone. So Big Shed, Little Shed works a lot better. What have we got in this shed? So this area is just a little seating area, I guess. This was a fake fireplace I built from my old house, which I've sold now, and it didn't have a fireplace, and I really missed not having a fire, so I made this sort of fake one, and it's got the little heater with fake flame effect. There's tools. I don't have a huge number of tools, so pretty much all the hand tools are sort of in this one little cabinet, and I've got a couple of drills and an impact driver and a little Dremel that sit on top there with their charging things. I've got a few files and pliers and bits and pieces on this board, and for hand tools, the only other things I really have is down under there, tons of clamps and vice grips. One of the companies I buy electronics from was selling a whole bunch of vice grips really cheaply. They're not great, they're not hugely high quality ones, but you don't often need high quality ones. And then over here I've got hammers and dollies and bits of metal and things like that I use for bashing bits of metal around. This also has my milling tool type stuff and various cutters and taps and dies are in here and in here. In this one, hand metal cutting tools. That's just more milling stuff. The mill, it's nothing fancy. It's only really one step up from a a decent pillar drill with an XY table, but it's been really handy, and I've actually been able to do a lot of stuff on it that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Having the DRO on it, which I added myself, really makes it useful. One thing that would be nice to have sometimes is a powered feed, because at the moment everything has to be done by hand. And I think I mentioned a few weeks ago about things rusting in here. So I've actually tried oiling everything down with the slideway oil, because a big bottle of it came with this mill, and that's worked really well. It's actually kept everything nice and rust free. It's pretty sticky stuff, but it's probably what you need. This little toaster oven I got from an op shop for I think $20 or $40. Really handy for heating up bearings or housings if they're small enough to fit in there, and also baking paint on small pieces of metal that I paint. This is my little lathe. It's a Emcomat 7. So I got this as a step up from a little, what do they call them, 12 by 7 Chinese lathe, which I did quite a lot of stuff on. This is only a small step up from that. But again, it's better than no lathe at all, and I've been able to do quite a lot on this little lathe that I couldn't do before. I'm not an expert at it. It's one of these things where I don't do enough of these things to really become expert at it. It's a hobby. So I do a little bit, and then I might not touch it for months, and then I have to come back and relearn everything. But I'm slowly improving with it all. This one is a bit of a pain for thread cutting, having to change the gears, and the little diagrams and things are quite hard to follow. But I think in some previous films I mentioned about I'd 3D printed gears temporarily, and that worked reasonably well, but the plastic's not really strong enough. So I got some other mini lathe change gears, because this lathe didn't come with them. And the originals are really hard to find and really expensive. But you can get mini lathe gears, and I was able to machine out the centers to fit this one and hand filed the little slot for the keyway. And that's worked really well. I am missing a few gears, but so far I haven't actually hit any threads that that require the missing ones, so that's good. This table's just full of mess at the moment. Inside this tackle box is all my little bits and pieces for the Dremel. Let's see. Now this I mentioned in the last film. This is something we picked up from the op shop about 2 weekends ago, a couple of weekends ago, and it was just a trolley on wheels, and I think it was $65, which you can't even buy the casters, a set of casters, for that cheap. It was a bit rusty, so I brought it home. I took the wooden shelves out, stripped it all down, and just painted it again with that zinc rich primer, since I had a lot of it left over from the radiator shell. And the feet are actually held in with there's sort of tapered fittings. So there's a sort of plastic thing with a metal wedge either end and a captive nut at the top, and you slide that into the tube, and then you tighten it up, and it sort of pulls it all together and it wedges into place. I did have to repair 2 of those because they were missing the nuts that held the casters in place, and they just fell out. But that was easy enough. So I basically found a nut that would fit, and then re-drilled the center of the nut and re-tapped it for the M12 thread that those casters needed. But it's quite a nice little moving, rotating trolley. The rotation actually worries me because there aren't any locks on the wheels, and I do know if we have an earthquake, things are going to roll around, so I need to be mindful of that. I might get another sort of rubber mat, possibly like that one, something like that, and cut it up to put under the wheels so it doesn't roll around, but I can move it if I need to. And my friend Bruce will be pleased because it's actually got the lip all around the edge, so things like this can't fall off. I do still need to get the little end caps to go in there, so I'm just missing 2 of them. Let's see, what else have we got? So the little pillar drill, that was something that a friend's father gave to me. He actually rescued it out of a skip, and a long time ago I sort of restored that. I think I used electrolysis or electrolytic rust removal to clean up the pillar, and that all came up really well. You can tell it had had a hard life. You can see where it had been almost drilled through, and where people had drilled through the table. So I actually repaired it with that's just JB weld, and that's actually held up reasonably well. It's pretty strong stuff. Let's see, vise, because I ended up breaking my old one. What else have we got tool wise? So the little English wheel, these are interesting. So I've been watching a lot of I've forgotten the name of his channel, but it's Dom from the repair shop, who's been reviving the Ranelagh brand English wheels, which are proper awesome old cast iron solid English wheels. And it looks like he's done a great job completely recreating those and getting all of the technical details absolutely right, which is pretty neat. But obviously they won't be cheap, and goodness knows how much it would cost to get something like that from the UK to New Zealand. So those are out of reach. Anyone who's ever played with English wheels know that they don't come up very often. When they do, they're worth a lot of money. So this is just kind of one of the cheaper ones. I think it was about 900 New Zealand dollars. And it works perfectly well. The top wheel's pretty small. You do get a set of anvils with it, including a flat one. There is some talk online about whether anvils should be continually radiused or have a flat in the middle. It's one of those things where I think people will argue night and day about what happens to be best. But I'm not good enough at it, and I don't really care, because this seems to work well enough for me. It's easily up to my skill level, and it works fine. I've done bits of the Austin 7 were done on it, the boot lid. Most of it, the Austin 7 was done on my friend Joss's proper solid English wheel, which was a Edwards brand one. But no, this works okay. Let's see. I think I've got another one of these somewhere, but that was a piece of aluminium I just put some crown into on it, just messing around, and I've been using that in the toaster oven as a little oven tray, which is why it's in there. Other tools, I've got a little bead roller. I modified this with the windscreen wiper motor and a speed controller to motorize it. So it just runs off a rescued 12-volt battery. This one here, that's the one for the Riley. And there's just a simple, down here, a simple foot pedal. Where's it gone? And a little change switch and a speed controller. You can go quite slow. You can actually get another set of speeds out of it, because the wiper motors come with 2 windings, and you can change it to a slower winding. But that works well. These little bead rollers, these are just, again, cheap Chinese tools, but with a little bit of fettling, they can work well for an amateur. Sure, it'd be nice to be able to spend thousands and thousands on really nice tools and equipment, but I just can't do that. So I make do with things, and I try and fix them where I can. So even though this is sort of 1/2-inch steel plate, there's a ton of flex in things like this. So I welded on some steel tube all the way around, and that helps stiffen it up. I do have a set of wheels for it, which are over the other side of the shed, but you can also just make your own. So I use this one, which is just a plastic lower one, and it's just 3mm mild steel with a bit of a curve on the edge. I use that one when I'm doing a fold in metal, and if it's too long to go in my little folder, I just run this over it to give me a crease, and then I can do the fold on the crease, and that seems to work well. What else? Some various bits of Riley stuff here. These are little plating baths. This one is for zinc, and that one is for nickel. they work okay. I'm only talking about little tiny nuts and bolts and bits and pieces. So it'd be interesting to try and do that on a bigger scale, but that'll do for now. Various Riley bits. Up the top there are my amyl carbs, which one day I should look at rebuilding. Spare fridge from my old house. What else? Again, another one of these cheap Chinese tools, a little press. This one I also modified. So from the factory, this was horribly not straight. It was actually bent over at an angle, and the bottom of it wasn't flat. So this is where having a little lathe helped. I was able to chop this out, machine the ends to get it square, and re-weld it back in and make sure it was actually square to everything. And the other problem was this sort of cross yoke thing was way too loose in the frame, so this would just rattle backwards and forwards. And what I've ended up doing is making these spaces. This is actually from plastic chopping board, and it just happened that two of those fitted in there nicely. They're sort of screwed into the end of the frame, and that stops it rattling side to side. And a little bit of grease on it, it goes up and down fine. The other thing I did was made a little adjuster, not an adjuster, a bleed screw that kind of fits on there. What you're normally meant to do is use the end of the handle, but I find that's a bit of a pain in the neck, so I just made that little thing to go on it. What else? The girder crane, that was something I had to buy when we first moved in because I needed to assemble the mill. In my old house, the garage there had a convenient wooden beam right above where the mill was, and that's how I ended up assembling it. So this mill, you end up taking the headpiece off the bottom, the pillar. The whole thing weighs about 300 kg, I believe it is. So I ended up having to buy that girder thing, and then I was able to get it in here and lower that down to reassemble everything. So that was really useful. That's my stump that I use for hammering things out with my sandbag on top of it. This is just welding rod. So in terms of welding gear, I've got oxyacetylene there, and I use that a lot. That's really, really handy. When it comes to doing the body of the Riley, I'll probably be oxyacetylene welding it, because that's how I did the Austin, so that's how I know how to do it. Although I may play with doing it with TIG. I really need to get better at doing TIG aluminium. So this is the little TIG I've got here. Again, I modified it. It works fine, but it only came with the trigger on the gun, on the handle. So I ended up looking up similar models, and this one did have a connector on the front, but there was no information about it. So I looked up similar models and looked up the manuals and looked up the wiring diagrams for them and figured out that I could actually add a pedal to this. So I built my own pedal. This is a little electronic speed controller, and I had to modify the pedal to make it work. There's a little slider potentiometer in there that works off the foot pedal, and that works really well as well. So that lets me control the amperage a lot more carefully. And then there I've got my MIG welder, which was the first welder I ever bought, and that's lasted fairly well. That's what I ended up restoring the MGB with, which is obviously there under its dust sheet. And between those three, the MIG, the TIG and the gas, I can do most things. The only other thing that would be really nice is a proper spot welder, but again, they're not cheap, and of course they're big and heavy, so there's no point buying one from overseas. It would cost too much to get it shipped here. Over this side I've got various power tools, so sanders, angle grinder, hammer drill, things like that. Again, I don't have too many. One thing I did when we moved in here was bought a decent air compressor and a few little air tools, and this one's been incredibly useful. The little right angle die grinder with the little sanding roll-up discs. This is really cool. I wish I'd known about these earlier. It's much easier to use those to tidy up welds and things, knock the heads off welds, than an angle grinder, which is just a bit too harsh. Grinders, got a fairly decent one here, and I've got a nice little one here with a wire brush on it. This I got the same time as I got the bandsaw, which was from the local men's shed. They had a sort of garage sale thing last year, and I got that for $20, I think. It was ridiculously cheap. And the bandsaw, of course, was about $120, which is also silly cheap. So there's the Riley. Leaning up on the wall there is the old chassis that came off the donor car. So I think I almost have enough bits to build another rolling chassis. Very almost. And I don't know if I'll ever do anything like this, but you know, I've way back when worked for a company in the UK that did electric car stuff, so I've always been vaguely interested in it. And every time I look at a Riley 9 engine, which is very tall and narrow, if you know anything about Nissan Leafs, you'll recognize that it looks quite similar to a Nissan Leaf electric motor with its controller on the top. So I always wonder if somebody's going to build a little electric vintage car. I think the range would be crap because the weight of the batteries you have to carry means you wouldn't really go too far in it. But something like that Riley wouldn't be too bad, because you've actually got quite a bit of space in there for battery packs and things. Obviously a Brooklands wouldn't work. There's just no space. You can barely fit in it as the driver, so there'd be no room for batteries. But a full-size Riley like that might work. I know somebody has done an electric Austin 7 in the UK. I'm not sure what sort of drive system they're using in it. Let's see, tools, what else have we got? I've got my jack there, and my little slip rollers, which again are useful, but at this hobby sort of scale, one of the problems is everything's too small. So this is only 600mm wide, and often what I need to do is bigger things, like the roll on a bonnet or something like that, and it won't fit in these, but it's still useful to have, not hugely expensive. Over here, there's the Austin 7. Got a little scroll saw. That's good for little smaller woodworky type things. My little sanding thing that I've had for years that I just put together from bits of scrap. I'll still use this one for little metal pieces that need sanding down. Here's my little pan brake. Again, it's never quite big enough, or it's never big enough to do absolutely everything you need. So very handy for small things, making little boxes and bits and pieces like that. But again, this is only 600 wide, so that is a bit limiting. That's Whitworth hardware there, and various other bits of hardware and washers and things. And I seem to have accumulated quite a number of these boxes full of random junk that one day I need to sort out. This ice cream container is reasonably well sorted. This is all new stuff, but the rest are just completely full of stuff. There's one there, there's actually another one under here, there's a couple of them there. They all just need sorting out. These are the boxes that you come and rummage through when you're missing just random odd bits of hardware, and you rummage through all your boxes and you're almost always guaranteed to come up with one less than the number you need. That seems to be how those work. Over here is my little sandblasting cabinet. Again, I've modified this, played around with it a bit. The light inside there is useless, so this is actually some sort of aquarium or other sort of LED light, and I just shine that in from the outside, and that seems to work fine. This needs a good clean, obviously. I've also played around with doing a siphon feed on the bottom, but it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. I think the media I've gotten here is well worn out, so I need new media for it, which would probably help. but that works a heck of a lot better after I bought a bigger compressor. It's still not a huge compressor, but I think this is getting up to basically the biggest you can run on normal domestic type supply, and not having to go to 3-phase and all that kind of thing. It works pretty well. This, it's again, it's a Chinese copy. I did look out for decent name brand ones, but the problem with them is even secondhand, they're expensive and they just don't come up very often. So sometimes you have to make do with what you can get, but it's working well. It's fine. I haven't got any complaints with it. It's been good so far. It's also one of these continuous run compressors, so I can leave it on, and once it's pressurized it switches off the compressor, but it leaves the fan going so the motor doesn't overheat, and that works a lot better than the ones that kind of turn on and off continually. I've got a little ultrasonic cleaner here, and this is really handy as well, but I haven't quite figured out what the best sort of solution to put in there is. I've just got a little bit of degreaser parts cleaner in there, but it works okay. There's my poor little Austin 7. This little yellow stand thing, again, it's kind of a painting scaffold that I modified, and I made it so that you can run the platform all the way to the top, not to stand on it, but it means I can have things underneath it, and I also use that to lift the engine in and out of the Austin 7, because an Austin 7 engine isn't very heavy, and the car's not very big, so I could move this over the top of the engine and just use a block and tackle underneath there with I just put a bar over the top. There's a hole in the floor, and I could use that to lift the engine in and out by myself, and that worked really well. This is all just shelving full of car parts and all sorts of other things. Over in the corner there, I've got some racking with a little bit of metal stock. I don't have a huge amount because it's expensive and it's tricky to get. And I've got that mounted on the wall, and then underneath that is some sheet metal storage. It's just laying up flat against the wall. Because of the humidity and the condensation, everything rusts, so that's a bit annoying. The Land Rover is taking up a ton of space, and then those were my more recent tools. Was the little dust extractor. I'm still playing around with actually making the extraction system, and the little sander, which now I've sorted it all out, and they actually gave me some money back on that for it not being quite as advertised. That works well now. I realized after a while why this table is up this height. It always seems silly to me that they're missing this height, but it's because of the setup on this machine. If you've got a big long piece, it needs to be above this. So for example, sanding those station formers, you kind of have to rotate it across here, so it needs to sit above this. And then I've got my little bandsaw, which again is working well, and it took me a little while to realize that it was better to extract the dust from underneath, not from the top, because the blade cuts downwards and all the sawdust is going down. So this seems to work a lot better. It's not really attached, it's just kind of sitting there, but it helps. It takes a lot of the dust out of the air, and that's really it. So as I say, it's not much of a workshop. I don't have a huge amount of stuff, but I don't really need a lot of stuff for what I'm doing. But hopefully that gives some idea.